was measured. So it's one of those deals where we're going to have to look at the way we actually communicate our desires in order to ensure that our democratic process continues. Even at the city council meeting on Tuesday, the teleconference one, I attempted to call in and get in touch so that I could comment on an item. And I don't know if I called in too late during the process or what, but I wasn't able to get through on the item I wanted. So it with the public being prevented from prevented from being at these locations and allowing people to speak, we really have to make sure that we're not ignoring voices, even through the digital divide. So it looks like we're going to have to radically alter kind of how we do information and data in order to make sure that everyone has the same access to this kind of conversation. You can't hear this on cable TV yet.
Right. Well, I mean, give it time, really. So you mentioned that we've heard Biden, we've heard Bernie on these different platforms now that I'm sure they may not even understand. But how do you think on a local level, politicians and candidates can get in contact with the actual public?
Yeah, it seems like this is not going to be the top concern. I mean, with voting turnout from previous municipal elections hovering about, 5 to 10%, it wasn't a priority before. So I think this kind of format where politicians, I mean, when I say where we are able to kind of do a more long-term conversation is going to become incredibly handy. Up until now, it's been generally formatted as 90-second or 2-minute responses to a specific question. But podcasting doesn't really work that way. So I think there will be electronic forums where, you can ask a politician a question and just kind of give them as long as they want to go on about it, because there's not the necessity to be live. So I think it's going to kind of change the breadth versus depth of politics, where most of the time, it's a very surface level understanding of what a politician thinks. I think we have the opportunity now to start to get deeper into individual items and policies and things like that. So I think we'll be looking at needing more coherent and logical thought from our politicians rather than cheerleading and slogans. When you're chanting by yourself, it doesn't really do too much.
Right. And, where we have always had very minimal voter engagement on the local level, people are really concerned right now with everyday things like, are the police going to pull me over just for being out at a certain time? What kind of places am I allowed to be in? How long will this last? When will my kids be back in school? These are really serious questions that people need answers to. And for the most part, I feel like the city has been, pretty good about disseminating that information. I've been pretty confused about the response from AISD with my kid, but I think they're finally coming together on a plan. But I'm wondering if, because people have more time just sitting at home right now, the ones that aren't working, and B, because there are serious questions that people need, if they're paying more attention, if they're more likely to vote and to really look at who's running in these local elections as opposed to ordinarily.
Yeah, it is amazing the dynamic edges. It's opportunity, but there's also crisis, um, as far as how people pay attention and what's important. So let me say, I am, I believe, currently still employed by the AISD as a substitute teacher. Um, on March 27th, my sub assignment ended, and the AISD agreed to allow or pay me for the weeks that the schools were closed. As of this point, AISD is closed for the spring semester. So I assume you're talking about with schooling, making sure that there's a kind of centralized online platform where it's not necessarily emails coming in that you have a class at this time, as teachers try to individually get in contact with their students. And I think the AISD is moving to that. It's going to be a real process because up until now, they've been very much designed to bring kids into a room and count them and then make sure that they are getting the appropriate knowledge within that classroom. And now we're not really doing classrooms anymore, at least physically. So it's really going to challenge the process. You know, what if school doesn't start next fall? You know, what kind of investment do we have in these school buildings which are no longer being used? Meanwhile, we need to make sure every kid has access to the electronic landscape in order to be a part of that schooling. And so at that point, do we start talking about having data be a utility, just like water or electricity, in order to make sure that every kid has the opportunity for the same education the way it's written in the Texas Constitution. So again, a lot of dynamic edges. It was, I think, Wednesday or Thursday of spring break that the AISD announced that they were going to be postponing returning to school. And now they've extended that all the way out through the spring semester. So it is particularly frustrating as a parent for me, seeing as how I used to deal with 120 kids a day, and now I'm just dealing with one and having a harder time getting him to learn.
Right.
It's very much kind of breaking down the social dynamic of parenting a little bit, being like, okay, so now I'm also the school head, where I'm like, you need to be on the computer talking to your teachers right now. So it's kind of, it is an interesting dynamic. I was teaching world history at Sam Houston, 10th graders. And so throughout this year, I've kind of been back in the same classroom with breaks at other schools and things. And so I had the chance to teach them about the Black Plague in the 13th century. And just before spring break, we had gotten up to World War I. And so we hadn't quite done the Spanish flu yet. But this spring, I was tracking the numbers coming out of China and discussing with them just sort of how this thing is, COVID, I mean, by this thing, is going to be one of those deals where it's probably going to last in the history books longer than the elections that go on this year, certainly any of the sporting events. But, we're kind of watching world history live. There's a saying in China, may you live in interesting times. And I think we've really knocked that out of the park this year.
Yeah, I'd say so. This is the world will never be the same after this. Our cities won't, our kids won't. And we're all kind of grappling with that at the same time and trying to, reinvent our place in society and reinvent which roles are important. Like you said, delivery drivers have now become one of the more important people, grocery store workers, and we're seeing how few people we really need to be out in workplaces, for society to function. It's interesting. And I think overall that the city of Arlington is doing a pretty good job disseminating information, like I said. But they're winging it just like the rest of us.
We have to acknowledge that everybody is basically learning on the fly.
Right.
We can look to the responses of some of the countries in Asia that had experience with the SARS epidemic, I guess 15 years ago or so. And, they had protocols in place. So it is very much a learning curve that everybody's going through. And they handled, at least publicly, they've all handled it far better than it looks like we're handling it. It's one of those deals where China put travel restrictions on more people than the U.S. has. They had 400 million people that you cannot leave this area, so the kind of it's not even a lockdown really when you think about it. It's just a restriction of public events that we're seeing across the U.S. is really the best plan we have at the time to prevent the spread. I think I looked at the numbers this morning, and we were over 600,000 cases in the world, and I think the U.S. accounted for 100,000 of them, and Texas was still in the low hundreds. But this did, the governor of Texas did come to Arlington, as we had a man die in the Masonic home over on Division Street as one of the first two deaths, I think, in Texas. I think there was one other one that was reported slightly before it, but this is kind of the state recognition of this is becoming and is a problem for us to deal with. And it's Texas is sort of a laboratory within itself. Each county is directing, in some ways, its own policies in this time. And in a 9-county area like DFW is, that can lead to significant differences between counties as far as when lockdowns go into effect, different policies about what are essential and what aren't. Apparently, golf is essential in Arlington. I am I guess I have to explain also, I'm a former caddy. So knowing a little bit about golf, there are ways that you could maintain social distancing while doing it. But, I bet most of the people that play golf are probably packing into as few golf carts as possible and sharing golf balls and all the other things that could be possible transmission routes. But, again, it's about the learning curve. We're all coming to understand how many regular normal things from our past are in fact dangerous in the now.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be really one of those generational changes where I hope kids adapt to it more quickly. We're seeing in the U.S. kind of a higher percentage of young people in our ICUs than some other countries. And I think in part that's because the media was saying that, it doesn't really affect young people. I think we politically need to start